Hi, everyone. Welcome to another one of our exciting TTFF 20 industry events. This is our documentary filmmakers panel that we're very excited about. And I'll be introducing you to our panelists very shortly. But first, I wanted to say thank you for joining us. This year's film festival is online, and you can check out online.ttfilmfestival.com for our full listing where you could purchase bundles. We are on day 4 already of the festival. It runs from September 9th to 15th. So get in those purchases quickly. Now for our panel today, please be sure to post your comments and your questions in the section below because we'd love to hear from you. And also don't forget to check out our new media exhibition, which is installed at the Medulla Art Gallery in Woodbrook. So before I start, I'd just like to thank our incredible TTFF 20 sponsors and contributors. Leading sponsorship is given by the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and the Arts, with contributing sponsorship from Republic Bank Limited, and we have Shell Trinidad and Tobago Limited supporting our great online industry event. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our panelists. They are from the Caribbean, Latin America, and we have from the UK as well too, so you'll excuse me if I do a bit of reading for their bios, but I don't want to miss out anything. We have Henrique Amud, who's a screenwriter and an image researcher working in Rio. His first feature debut as a writer was a documentary, and Henrique, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing this, my Portuguese is not that great, Como Voce Me Vê, with Canal Brazil in 2017. And his next documentary as a writer and researcher will be the upcoming Othello o Grande, by Lucas H. Rossi dos Santos. Stunned I Remain Alert, which is the film in the festival this year, is his debut film as a director. Gabrielle Blackwood, who's joining us from Jamaica, is an award-winning director and director of photography, who has written, directed, and shot short films, documentaries, and commercials in both Jamaica and New Zealand. Her films have been screened at the Pan-African Film Festival in LA, Diversity in Cannes, the American Black Film Festival, the Festival International du Film Pan-Africain de Cannes, the LA Film and Script Film Festival, as well as many others. And her feature screenplay, Kendall, has also been shortlisted for a Sundance Lab, the Screencraft Drama Feature Writing Competition, and is the winner of the Caribbean Tales 2019 Big Pitch Competition. Her film, Unbroken, tells the story of a Jamaican amputee who defies all odds to qualify for the Jamaica Olympic rowing team. Then we have Tracy Hutchings from Trinidad, who is a content creator, voice character actor, editor, producer, and an Addy Award-winning copywriter with 19 years of experience in the industry. Tracy is a self-proclaimed nerd, I didn't say that, who uses any excuse to cosplay and has a deep love for film scores and soundtracks. He received his certificate in television and film production at the Institute for Broadcasting Careers and is pursuing his bachelor's in film at the College of Science, Technology and Applied Arts of Trinidad and Tobago. COVID Chronicles is his first major documentary that is in the festival this year. Then we also have Sam Lockyer joining us from England. He's an RTS award-nominated director from the UK. In 2014, Sam worked as archive researcher on the feature documentary Bicycle, which screened successfully at independent cinemas around the world. And in 2015, he made Rugby, a Midland Story, which is a short documentary celebrating the origins of the sport that screened at the opening ceremony of the Rugby World Cup. He's a lifelong cricket fan, which I know very well now. And having grown up in the 1990s, Brian Lara, our very own, is his childhood hero. 501 Not Out, which was our opening night film, is Sam's debut feature documentary and is set for a 2020 release. We also do have Michèle Stephenson, who may be joining us a bit later on. So I won't go into her bio just yet, but I would do so in a bit. So welcome to you all and thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, it's an honor to be here.
Great.
Thank you very much.
So lovely. So let's get started. And as mentioned to you before, this is going to be a very open discussion and conversation about documentary filmmaking that so many of us love because we've seen the power of documentaries in the last, I would say, 10 to 15 years, even more than we did before. So one of the questions that I wanted to pose to all of you is, what drives you to tell the stories that you tell? And what do you believe is the power and the strength of documentary films? Who would like to start with that?
Who wants to go first?
Tracy, what about you?
For me, the thing is that I feel like there's always something that needs to be said, and that might be a very normal thing to say, but like there is something to be said, and how can I say it, and how can I say it best with what I have, and with the equipment that I have and everything. So for me, the idea of documentaries, I kind of like the idea that it feels real. It's not necessarily a narrative piece, but what it is that it allows you to kind of take a deep insight into what someone else might be feeling, how you were feeling at the time. You get to grow during the whole experiences, and that for me is why I love documentary filmmaking and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you very much. Anyone else would like to pick up that question? What drives you to make the films that you make?
I think I can say that I have a lot of stories to tell, especially as a screenwriter. But I only do the stories that I feel that like they need to be out there. They need to be told. Maybe not even by me, but if nobody else is telling this story, so I should tell it. That's what guides me.
Stories that need to be told. Mm-hmm. And Gabrielle, what about you?
I was saying it yesterday that for me, I like to tell stories about the unsung heroes or people who can't necessarily speak for themselves or don't have a platform to do so. And that's where I think documentary storytelling is supremely important. And I also feel it's one of the greatest free-form creative ways of telling somebody's story. It's not a narrative, it's not fictional. And in one sense, it may be seen as objective, but depending on what type of documentary you do, whether it's observational, participatory, reflexive, whatever it is, in another sense, it is subjective. So it's almost like a double-edged sword for me. I love talking with people, I love sharing their stories, but as a gatekeeper, whether being the director or the editor, I also find it interesting in terms of how the story is crafted, because in essence, that's what the viewer is seeing. That's the perspective. Your perspective is what they're getting. And so I have always wanted to do a completely observational type of documentary, which I've never done. I've always done I've done different forms of documentary, but completely observational, where I'm not in it at all. I'm not asking questions. I'm literally just, following the subject around. But I think there's just so much beauty in documentary storytelling because, yes, it tells the stories that we may not necessarily see on the big screen, the smaller stories. And that's what interests me about it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I often feel as well, too, that, the unsung heroes, as you're saying, their stories need to be told because those are some of the most beautiful stories. And we just don't hear about them, and they can inspire others to do things that are needed to be done and to make change. And Sam, what about you? What drives the films that you make?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about making films about things that I'm passionate about, and I guess I'm incredibly lucky, incredibly fortunate to do what I do for a job. It's not, but it doesn't feel like a job in many ways. And if you take something like 501 Not Out, Brian Lara was my hero growing up as a child here in the UK, and I've always wanted to make a film about him and his achievements. So I've fulfilled a long-held dream in making the film. But in terms of other films that I've made, again, I just feel like with any filmmaker, any documentary filmmaker, if you're making a film about something that you're passionate about, the film is going to be a hell of a lot better, I'd like to think, than if it was something you weren't particularly interested in. I think that's probably a pretty obvious point. But I guess just subjects that I've got an interest in, And then, like the other guys were saying, untold stories, think films that, stories that haven't necessarily been told before, or trying to cast a new light on a subject. If it has been done before, what can you do that's different? How can you tell this story in a different way that's going to reach out to audiences in an authentic and engaging way? I guess that's kind of how I've always wanted to sort of with my work. And I guess throughout the work that I've done, kind of archive has been a big part of it. And I guess I found archive as like a really great way of kind of getting that authenticity and getting to the heart of the story, and using archive kind of in a way to drive the narrative forward.
Mm-hmm. And that's actually something that I'd like to talk about later on in our discussion as well too, is the marriage of archive and live action filming, because there are some films that, might be 85 or 90% archival footage just because they're not able to tell the story using live action filmmaking. So we can talk about that a bit later on. But just before we do, I wanted to welcome Michèle. Hi, Michèle, to the panel. Michèle Stephenson.
Hi, sorry about that. I was having some issues with the background and it was not working. So you were, so sorry about that. I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us. Not a problem. I'm just going to let our viewers know a bit of your bio so that they can get a sense of you as well. Michèle is a co-founding member of the RADA Film Group. She's a filmmaker and artist and author who draws from her Panamanian and Haitian roots and international experience as a human rights attorney to tell provocative stories in a variety of media that speak to personal and systemic liberation. Her work has appeared on numerous broadcast and web platforms, including PBS, Showtime, and MTV. And her most recent film, American Promise, was nominated for 3 Emmys, including Best Documentary and Outstanding Coverage of a Current News Story. The film also won the Jury Prize at Sundance and was selected for the New York Film Festival's main slate program. Her documentary Stateless, which we have in the film festival this year, follows the grassroots campaign of a young attorney named Rosa Iris, I hope I'm pronouncing that correct, as she challenges electoral corruption and fights to protect the right to citizenship for all people. And Michèle, the question that I had just posed to the panel was, what drives you to tell the stories that you do? I mean, Stateless is such a powerful documentary because it explores how citizenship was ripped from Dominicans of Haitian descent in 2013, I believe it was, right? By the order of the Supreme Court. So if you just tell us a bit insofar as what pushes you to tell the stories that you do.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Again, Trinidad Film Festival. I'm very happy to be here. Actually, the film American Promise was at Trinidad Film Festival as well. So it's one of my all-time favorite festivals. Had a wonderful time, and the opportunity for us to come together. If we do virtually too, it warms the heart. So thank you. I think in terms of, I came to making film kind of later sort of in life after working on having, previous careers in human rights work. And I think it comes from a very personal place. And it's really, in some ways, a form of healing and reckoning and working for me, using film to work through, issues that my family has faced, that I have faced, that deal with kind of the ingrained aspects of what kind of white supremacy does to us on multiple levels, the personal, the political, the social, and some of the decisions that we make. And with regards to Stateless itself, I mean, American Promise was a very personal film. It was a reflection on our family and our son and his journey through the educational system in New York City, and looking at systemic racism there, but from a very personal perspective. And I think when I heard about the decision that happened in 2013, having grown up really knowing and hearing a lot about not just the tensions between Dominicans and Haitians, but also the collaborations and the common history that exists, this was a kind of a calling for me to go back and kind of explore not just my roots in the island, but also kind of do a deeper dive into what is the complexity of what exists down there and how white supremacy sort of manifests itself on both sides of the island and how it's shaped me. So Rosa Iris' story, the story in Stateless, I feel, was really a personal calling. So for me, film, using it as a tool to process my own healing and experiences, but I think that also which storytelling always does. I feel when you come from the specific, you will always, I feel, will have a larger resonance, you know. So yes, that's how I come to film, trying to figure out ways of healing, ways of using art to heal.
And I'm sure you feel to inform as well too.
Yes, absolutely, to inform as well. Although to inform as well, yes. But I'm thinking about, when I think about the audience, I feel that we, the filmmakers, are our first audience. In the sense that I must be, well, satisfied is not the word, because you're never really satisfied even when the film is done. You know, there's always something you could have kind of added or that you didn't really, you know, it's always a compromise, right? But feel like, yes, this is something I would watch. This is something that I feel resonates for me, and kind of having the confidence that there are others who will feel the same way. So it's sort of like, what's my community? What am I speaking to? And yes, informing, but you know, it was interesting for Stateless. We had kind of arguments in terms of, well, how much of the history are we going to talk about before we start the film, right? How many people know about, you know, Dominicans of Haitian descent? What is it about, you know, this Dominican woman who's a character in the film who is a right-wing fascist nationalist, but she's Black as far as many people are concerned, you know, certainly in North America. How far am I going to go into explaining it? Right? So information, yes, but I feel like storytelling and the power of character-driven immersion is how people, I feel, will connect emotionally. Because sometimes we get bogged down the exposition because we think maybe the white or dominant culture doesn't, you know, necessarily understand certain things. And I don't want to necessarily give that real estate space, the space for that necessarily. So I'm just provoking over here. So yes, inform, but you know, tell the story in a way as you being your first audience too, and feeling like that there is compromise, but you have to decide which compromise are you going to make, right? And sort of kind of
as the director. Okay, well, we'll continue this conversation, but that actually leads me into my next question. For all of you is about process. And I think we can all say that everyone has a different process when it comes to filmmaking. We discussed this on our narrative panel as well, in terms of just what is your process as a filmmaker? How do you come to the stories? So maybe we could speak a bit about that, because these films are also diverse. I mean, we have Chronicles, from Tracy, which is, you called it a documentary, Tracy, is that correct?
Yeah, yes, sorry about that. I call it a documentary.
Yeah.
Because when I was finished with it, in fact, while I was putting it together and when I was finished with it, I looked at it and I was satisfied to some degree. As Michèle would say, I was satisfied to some degree with it, but I also looked at it and I thought, I don't know if I should call this a documentary. Like I've seen documentaries, and documentaries are this sacred thing. And yes, this work is sacred to me, but I wasn't sure. So I was like, okay, maybe we just, and basically it might have been a little insecurity thing, but it was just like, okay, this may not necessarily be a real documentary. So I'm calling it a documentary, and it kind of took it from that.
I noticed you didn't call it a mockumentary, which yeah. That's another genre.
That's another whole height, yeah. But I said, okay, this is a documentary, so you can live there.
Yes, very much so. And what was your? Because this is your debut documentary.
This is my first real documentary, because like my friend Richard, for one, Richard Rollins, who actually has some pieces in here. Like when he started doing his art exhibitions and stuff, he would ask me to just, he would have footage and he would ask me to edit and compile a story and stuff for like his exhibitions. But this is my first like real live, documentary.
Yes. So what was, and I want to pose this question to all of you. So feel free to answer as you'd like. What was, but Tracy, we could start with you as you're talking. What was your process for this film? How did you even start on it?
Well, it came from a deep-seated desire not to fail the semester. Let's start with that. Because So there's a little random background. Every semester you have a project that you need to give up, and it's either a short or we're building some scripts or something like that. And I had an idea that I was going to do. Called up some friends and had everything already organized, and it was planned. And then COVID-19 happened, and it happened it started happening in Trinidad, and everything started to contract, and there was a need. At that point, I was like, okay, I'm going to start doing something of a journal documenting my feelings about this whole process, how it is that we're going to work from home now, and generally how I've been feeling. And I thought to myself, okay, I can't do the original idea that I wanted to do, but let me build this out into another idea, call up some friends again, see how I can get some footage and get everybody together and put a product out there so that A, I don't fail the semester because that's not part of my plans, and B, that I can legitimately have a story out there that reflects my feelings, but at the same point in time, I realized like a lot of people were feeling the same way or affected in different ways. So it was like, okay, this is where we're going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the same sense of panic. Trust me, I'm able to relate. Myself and all my girlfriends, we were very much able to relate with that sense of panic.
Yeah.
Concerning the pandemic. I think, Henrique, you and I may have discussed this. Sometimes in terms of process, something happens and you just have to grab that camera and run and go and film without even the prep that you want to do. You just know that I need to go and film this. I need to do something. I need to take action. So can you speak a bit about your process and what happened with Stunned I Remain Alert?
My film, I have to say first that I co-directed this with Lucas Santos, who cannot be here today, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. But he sent his best regards to everyone, and he loves being in Trinidad Tobago Film Festival. And he had this idea because our film is about Henrique Azevedo, who is a journalist and a human rights activist in Brazil since the 60s. And in the 70s, he was tortured by the military dictatorship. And horrible things happened to him and to his family. And nowadays he has Parkinson's disease, so he's in a really frail state. And he has a really tough story. And Lucas knew him, and he once told me about this guy that he knew, that he was a journalist, and what happened to him. And he really wanted to make that documentary, and he wanted me to make it with him. And we talked about it for a year or something, a year and a half. And then when Bolsonaro was elected the president of Brazil, we were caught off guard. And he praises the torturers of the military dictatorship. And so it was something that we just knew that we had to do the film. We had to run. We had to do this as soon as possible. We had to tell the story because it needed to be told. It couldn't be forgotten. So a week later, we headed to São Paulo and we interviewed Henrique for a night. I had never met him before. It was very strange because I asked these deep personal questions, really tough questions for this person that I had never seen before, and he's debilitated. But it was an amazing interview. It was really, really great interview. We got like 2.5 hours of great talks, and that was it. We didn't know exactly what to do with it. Nice. So we came back home. We were in the middle of doing a documentary that a feature documentary that we hope to release next year. Him, Lucas as a director, and me as his co-writer, and we just went back to our work in this other documentary. And whenever we had time, we went to the editing bay and we spent weeks and weeks just figuring it out, trying to find our film. And then we figured out it was through archival footage. Then we got deep into archival footage, and little by little we found our film and how to take 2.5 hours of a great talk and put it into a 15-minute short film. We did it basically all in the editing bay. That was a process.
Very difficult. I noticed that your film used archival footage, like Sam's as well too. And as you're saying, the editing process, so many times that's where films come together, is in the editing room. With documentaries, there's only so much you can plan in advance.
Yeah, all documentaries that I've done to this day, that's my experience only. But for all the documentaries for TV and for the theaters, it was all. I mean, we shot all we could,
right.
And then we go to the editing bay and find it there. We find the film, we find the TV series there. And it's been great. It's been because it's if you have the time, of course, it's a really great experience of having this great amount of footage of action, of things happening, and think about it in a new way and trying to find a narrative there. I love it.
Mm-hmm. And that's what a lot of filmmakers say, is that the process of discovery happens so much in the edit suite as well, as in combination with when you're filming. And as Sam, insofar as archival footage, which actually was a topic I thought we would discuss a little bit later, but as we're on it now, how did you marry that with the live action filming in your film in terms of preparation? How much thought went into archival footage before you set out to film?
Yeah, absolutely, Catherine. Archive for me is like a massive part of, I think, for me, of filmmaking, for documentary filmmaking. I'm a big fan of Asif Kapadia, so something like Senna, absolutely incredible film. And yeah, kind of all of my work up to now has had some kind of archival elements in it. So obviously, being a big cricket fan, I've watched, so many clips of Brian's innings over the years, and it was a case of what archive can we find that's been rarely seen or even never been seen before. That was the kind of goal, I guess. But yeah, totally, it was a case of just finding what's out there initially, and then going from there. So archive was kind of more towards the beginning of the process, I guess, and also because the actual 501 innings, although it's been covered in the past, it's kind of been overlooked in the sense that the 375 and the 400 innings by Brian, they've had more attention, which is obviously fair enough. But the 501 hadn't really been kind of covered in any great detail before. So I was kind of like, I've really got to make this film, and what footage is out there, and what footage could we maybe find that nobody's seen before. And equally stills as well. There's a tremendous amount of stills in the film. And again, it was, what stills can we find that maybe haven't been seen before? So yeah, archive was a massive part of it. And then obviously you've got to budget has to come into play there as well, because obviously a lot of sort of sports footage is incredibly expensive to license. So when we tracked down the two school kids that were part of the pitch invasion at Edgbaston in 1994, we also discovered some other fans that were there on the day. They'd shot their own footage on a video camera, and this footage had never been seen before. So to discover that was absolutely incredible, and I was keen to for them to tell their own story. And they're the older couple, Brian and Anne, in the film.
Very endearing.
Yeah, they're a really lovely couple. And then someone like Ronald Daniel. So he was a photographer. He was teaching at Fatima College when Brian was playing cricket there, and he very kindly kind of offered to give us access to his amazing photographs of Brian as a young boy sort of playing at Fatima. And I remember when he sent the images over, I was in disbelief at the quality of them, but also the just the intimacy of these images, and they really captured some amazing moments. Brian's, I think his first 100 playing at Fatima and things like that, and I was just like, wow, this is incredible. So I've always loved archive, both stills and moving image, and it was a case of trying to interweave as much of that as we could into the narrative to really take people to that moment, because I feel like the immediacy of that footage, or that still capturing that moment in time, I think is really, really powerful. And I think I sort of maybe repeating myself a little bit from the Q&A before, but if I'd had my own way, I would have used a lot more archive in the film, but it was just literally, budget restrictions.
Yes, because it can be very expensive. And so I would assume that you started planning for this even before you went to Trinidad to film?
Yeah. So it was kind of probably 2014 was when I first had the idea to make the film, and then it was probably a three-year process, I guess, of actually making the film. And then obviously when we went out to Trinidad quite late, in the sense that we'd shot a lot of the key interviews in the UK already. And we had a lot of the archive, we'd done a lot of research, and we'd found some great footage and great stills. So actually when we went to Trinidad, a lot of the film was kind of already there. But obviously, we didn't plan, we didn't know, we didn't even know when we got on the plane to go out to Trinidad, we didn't actually know Brian was in the country at that time, so it was just incredible when we went up to Diego Martin, and obviously Brian was playing there for a match to celebrate his 50th birthday, and then just to get invited to his birthday party at his mansion was just unbelievable. But when I was on the plane going over there, I couldn't have imagined that would have happened. So I think Henrique was touching on it earlier. You can't plan for stuff, and you've got to have a bit of flexibility there. And that's when I kind of thought there could be something here in regards to my own personal story, in the sense of me being a cricket fan and Brian being a hero of mine. I was a little hesitant to have my voice in the film, but I guess that trip coming to Trinidad and then meeting all the wonderful people that we spoke to, and seeing all the incredible locations where the story began, the story of Brian Lara began, it became clear that actually there is a personal connection here, there is a personal story, and actually I wanted to tell that, I wanted to share my journey in the film.
Mm-hmm. Well, we definitely felt that journey from when you went to Santa Cruz to Fatima. My brother's an old Fatima boy, so it was lovely to see that as well too, and the teachers there. And Gabrielle, about process, what Sam just said about being very personal. Your film really makes us feel, approaches us very closely to your film subject, even just in the space of the 15 minutes of the film. So can you talk to us about first how you met him and how you went about, what was your process with Unbroken?
So Unbroken was, I've done documentaries mostly, as everybody has mentioned. Sam also spoke to it. When you're passionate about a subject, that's who you tend to gravitate to, and that's the work that you want to do. And so most of my documentaries have been that. Unbroken was a bit different because it was Getty Images UK that had approached me through a production company here called New Wave, and they wanted to do some short Jamaican stories. And so I started looking into different areas of the arts. I looked into music and sports, but I was a little bit tired of seeing music documentaries, not to say that there is anything wrong with them, but I knew that's what Jamaica was kind of known for. I didn't want to do track and field because I know that's also something that we're known for. And there's so many other stories that we have here and so many other people that are interesting, not to downplay what, everybody else has accomplished. And then I heard about this young man, Laron, and the fact that he came upon this sport by chance because he was working in a factory and he lost his leg. And he's a young father, and he needed to provide for his family and his newborn child. And So he was in a bit of in a bit of a rut. And then it was just, he was on the road one day and somebody said, there's this, new rowing team that we're trying to form, and, why don't you come join us? And he said, okay, he'll give it a try. And then he joined the team, and that was, for him, it was therapeutic, because after losing his leg, he obviously went through a bout of depression, and him also being an introvert, it just culminated even more. And so that was his way, I think, or the beginning of his journey into, I guess, self-healing from the trauma of the experience. And also, just building him up as an individual, because he needed to also go to school to just, self-improve. And so he found that in rowing. The downfall, I guess, in the journey in one sense is that he trains with able-bodied rowers, and he could not qualify or even try out for the Paralympic team because they said that he was not disabled enough. And he's an amputee right below the knee. And it was very strange. I couldn't understand it myself when I was documenting it, because it's able-bodied rowers themselves have to balance on that thing. It's not easy. We were out on the water with them, and even we saw like some beginners, and they were trying, and they're all falling out of, the boats. And, it's a whole balancing act in and of itself. And so it was interesting to witness Laron doing it, because he also had to learn and, go on that journey himself. And it was also it was peaceful watching how everybody interacted with him. They didn't treat him differently. He obviously didn't treat them differently. And that was another thing. Everything that they go through, he goes through, and vice versa. Well, not vice versa, but yeah. So he, as an individual, he's a very introspective person. And I think that's what I wanted to show in the documentary. But for me, it was a different experience because for example, with Dennis, that was, my feature doc a couple years back in Trinidad. That was about a man with Lou Gehrig's disease, with ALS, and he couldn't talk and he couldn't speak. And, and we're talking here, about archival footage. And I'm a huge history buff, and I love narrative fiction. I love historical pieces. And so when I see a documentary with archival footage, I get excited because it's something I don't know about. And why I do documentary pieces, even just short docs that I do, just in my free time, when my downtime, I do it because I'm learning something new. But for somebody like Dennis who couldn't speak, I had to try and find a way to get his story out. And that was just, through his wife and being metaphoric in the presentation of his story. And then also, I don't know if you've watched, the diving bell and the butterfly, and they found a technique of, working the nurse when, he had to blink and spelt out words. So I just think overall, the process of documentary filmmaking is interesting. And I think depending on the situation and the circumstance that you're putting, and yes, how you come upon the story, I think that determines a lot or greatly how the documentary turns out or the process of the filmmaking.
Exactly, yes. And with each film, it would be very different. And also depending on the subject of your film as well, your process would be affected as well. I'm sure you all would agree. Well, let me go to one of our audience questions before we continue with our discussion. So Alberta would like to know, given that there's an inner passion that drives you to produce a film, how has that been influenced by the fact that you must also have an audience who's interested in seeing your film? And how have you navigated this push and pull? Who would like to speak to that? Because that is, that is a balance that you have to strike, is the story that you want to tell, but there also needs to be an audience who needs to see it. And actually, I think, Michèle.
Yeah, there was a bit what I was talking about in terms of needing to, well, one, there's an audience, but I guess there are multiple things we're thinking about. What audience are we talking about, right? When we're saying that there is an audience that needs to hear these things. For me, the first kind of the first audience I think about, again, it's not a selfish thing, but it's about myself and the communities that I'm a part of, and understanding that those communities often are underrepresented and marginalized in terms of the stories that are told out there. So that's the first audience for me that I need to feel responsible is not even the word, that I feel a calling for, right? And that's where it goes back to me in terms of the healing. And when we were talking about information, what kind of information do we want to think? Are we talking about seeing ourselves up and self-reflecting on some of the processes that we want to talk about and tell stories about? So I think it's really about there are fundamental questions you have to ask yourself before you even write down the first word of the treatment, right? Or pick up the camera. What story are you drawn to, and the why? So, and what audience, right? But I also believe that Ralph Ellison has this quote about it's in the very specific that you find, although I don't like the term universal, but I'll use it here in this case, that we find the universal. So if I'm true to understanding the story that I want to tell that is partially a part of me and my personal experience or the community experience, if I can tell that specificity of that story and understand, the complexity of what that lived human experience is, it's going to speak to everyone, right? It will speak to everyone. I watch films that are done by all kinds of folks, and sometimes I don't even understand the language, right? But there's something about our common humanity that I see because it is in the storytelling. So I can't worry too much about the audience. I have to worry about, am I being true to myself and what I want to say? And will I be happy at the end of that? Well, happy is probably not the word, but you know what I mean? Will I feel like I've taken a journey at the end of this? And then the rest is going to happen. But it has to be about, what am I satisfying? What am I pursuing? And if I'm true to the storytelling and really looking at it in that space, and then also, in the case of documentary, which I feel is fundamentally extractive, it's a fundamentally extractive operation. I am extracting something, even if I'm in a collaborative process. There are power relationships that for me, I'm still trying to deal with, and that I feel are pushing me in other ways. I'm talking more about the observational end of it. So in that collaboration, am I being true also to that collaboration at the end of the story? Those are the people I'm accountable to, right? And I think the rest will come. If I think too much about audience in that sense, there is a level of, and I don't like this term either, authenticity, but there's a level of questioning that will come through it, and that I'm not speaking a truth. And I think if we stick with thinking about what our truth is, the rest will come. And it may come at a cost, right? Because I'm not speaking to necessarily dominant culture that has the means, and I think we've been too much duped into thinking that, that there is this audience out there, which is often white supremacist audience that I'm speaking to, where, there is an extractive aspect of the director coming in, telling a story, but telling story to his or her or their audience, right? Not to the audience of the community I'm telling the story about, right? And so anyway, it's complicated and we each have our own responses, but I try to question at every part of, you're talking about process. I think, there's another saying is like, I can't remember. Anyway, when I think about it again, it's a Godard about, it's not, we don't just make political films, we must make films politically. Right? So we have to invest in that process and think about, in the process for me, what is important? And understanding that there are certain costs and sacrifices that I will have to make in order to be true to that. And if I do want to appeal to a larger audience, that's great. That's great too. But be truthful about it, right? Into this, what does that mean, right? Am I taking so anyway, I can keep going. But anyway, so yeah.
I understand what you're saying. And I think what you're saying has to do with having that strong foundation to start. Because if you're not true to yourself, if you're not telling a story that you know in your heart you need to tell, that you want to tell, then you're not going to be able to follow through with the film and the project. Because we all know that filmmaking is a labor of love. And if you're not committed to it and you don't have that foundation, then it's not going to flow through to your audience as well. Tracy, what do you feel about, I know, as we said, COVID Chronicles is your first feature documentary, but, you know, with regard to what Michèle just said, how do you feel about being your own first, your first audience?
I live in my head, which is not always a good thing. So like you will put something together and you start wondering, is this something that the external forces, the outside world, is this something that they can connect with, or is this all just how, you know, your own perspective and your own brain? But what I have realized, the idea of truth, and maybe even global, let's say global truth, or humanity truth, because after I was finished making it, I realized that there were a lot of other people, not just the ones who I interviewed, but there were a lot of other people who were feeling the same panic. They were feeling the same stress. They were feeling the same sense of, okay, I'm going to, you know, pull on my faith. I'm going to pull on my family. I'm going to pull on whatever I need to in order to survive this. And so you realize that, okay, it's not just in your head. You're not just rambling on for the sake of rambling, but what you're actually saying is something that connects and has the potential to connect, not just with this little group, but maybe with a wider audience. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, with a wider audience. Gabrielle, Henrique, or Sam, would any of you like to talk, to speak to that point about the balance between audiences?
You want to go ahead?
Go first, Gabrielle, please.
Gabrielle.
So for me, I've never actually thought about the audience, at least not in the beginning. I don't think I've ever really thought about the audience until the edit is finished. For me, it has always been about the subject and their truth. But I think when I saying, like in the beginning, there's this fine line between what's the truth that I see and what is their truth, and how is it edited, and I think that's when I think about the audience, how are they going to now view the subject? And so I've always, every time I do a documentary, I'm a little bit nervous as to how, yes, people will see the subject because they're being vulnerable and they're sharing their story. And yes, I'm trying to tell their truth. And I also don't want them to get backlash for it. At the same time, recently I'd done a short doc on a guy who was wrongly accused for a crime. And I found that the stories that I gravitate to, but where the audience has an impact, is if it's a case where sharing that story can affect some change. So in other words, if he was wrongly accused, if I can prove it in the documentary, then maybe something in his reality will change, or maybe something in the reality of other people going through something similar will change once it's brought to their attention. So for me, it's always about the subject and projecting their truth, but then it's also how to do it because I'm also involved now. And it's how to, as objectively as possible, even though it's still subjective, tell that story in a way that the audience can understand.
Yes, right. So at that part, then you start to think about the audience a bit later on in the process. Yes. Okay. And Henrique, you wanted to speak about that?
I was just gonna say, this is also my debut as a short film director, and my only thinking about that was, how can I trust my gut and not, trust my gut in a way that I can make this interesting and experimental and go with the flow with the editing and the archival footage. So how can I not fuck this up for the person that I am documenting? Actually, my first thought is not me or the audience. My first thought was, how do I not fuck up this story? If nobody's telling this story and I'm gonna tell this story, how do I not fuck up? not fuck up.
Or the film.
So yeah, and then I just wanted the audience to understand his story and to understand this person. That's all that I could think. I didn't think if it was going to go to festivals or if it was going to be like how people were going to like it. I just wanted to experiment, do personal film, and do justice to the history.
Mm-hmm. I think sometimes we have more time to prep and to think about audience. Sam, I want to bring you in for this as well too, because I think with your film, Henrique, it was we need to go and film this now. We need to take action now. But I think other times we have more time to think about audience and do that sort of prep work. Sam, how was it for you with 501? Did you find that you had that time to think about audience? And if you did, at what point in your process did you start to think about your audience?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I guess it's slightly different in the sense that because I'm a fan of Brian's, I would go and watch the film, if that makes sense. I would go and watch my own film as a fan. If I hadn't made this film, I would go and see it at the cinema because I love Brian. I'd want to go and see it, like as if I went and saw Senna because I like Formula One, or I'd go and see a film about, I don't know, David Beckham because I like football. I'm a massive sports fan. So it's slightly different, but then again, because it was such a personal journey for me, I suppose I wasn't necessarily thinking about the audience at that time. I was just on a personal journey. Mm-hmm. But like what Henrique said there really resonated with me because as well, it was like, this is a big film. I'm telling a big story here about, for me, the greatest cricketer that's ever lived. Again, mm-hmm. I don't want to mess this up. This is a massive, massive thing.
Of course.
So that obviously, that taking all that on board, but again, because it was a bit, because we'd done a hell of a lot of research, and the process was a long process. On your other point, I did have some time to think ahead and think, when could we release the film and things like that. And mm-hmm. I knew the 25th anniversary was coming up in 2019, and I guess I was first alerted to that back in 2014 when it was the 20th anniversary, and I was like, at that time, I was like, oh, I wish I'd made this film at that moment. But then it took me kind of 4 or 5 years, up to now. And then obviously, we completed the film in 2019 to bring it out in time for the 25th anniversary of the 501. Right. Brian's 50th birthday that year. The Cricket World Cup was in England as well. So there was a hell of a lot going on. So the stars kind of aligned, and it was kind of like, now's the time to kind of make this film and bring the film out. So I guess in that sense, I did think about audience, and I guess it, subconsciously as a cricket fan, I couldn't help but not think of other fans, being a fan myself, if that makes any kind of sense. And I guess from in the film, there's a lot of fan perspectives in there, and I guess that kind of mirrors that thought around the audience, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think with some films they allow you to think about audience. They lend that, allow you to think about audience a lot earlier than others, or if at all. So thank you for that very much. So just moving on, I wanted to talk about trust between yourself and your subject as a documentary filmmaker, because without trust, we're not able to tell the stories that we tell. So I wanted to pose this question to you all. How do you build a trust between yourself as the filmmaker and your subject, other people in the film, communities whose assistance you may need to tell the story in the film? Because that is also something that cannot be forced nor faked. It has to be genuine. So I wanted to discuss that topic of trust with you. How do you establish trust in order to tell the stories that you tell? Michèle, would you like to? I'm coming back.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, so I take Stateless, for example. I mean, the film took 5 years to make. It's now 5 years since we started. I mean, the research started in 2014, actually it's after 6 years now. But for me, the time without the camera is just as important as the time when the camera's on, and if not, in some ways, even more important, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in the case of that, it was really about spending time off camera, talking about anything and everything, and becoming, and this is where, you know, objectivity is really not, I mean, it's illusory, really becoming friends. And this is also part of what happens after the film is over too. You become family, at least in my case. You know, I'm still in touch with people I've worked with from many years ago on different projects because of the trust that was established. So it's really about an understanding of the time you're investing in the space without the camera on. And you know, it's also part of casting, because I feel like in my particular case, you know, you're drawn to spending time with someone if you're going to invest that time, because you see something in the relationship also that goes sort of beyond the documentary itself, right? The piece itself. Yeah. So otherwise, it would be very difficult to invest like 5 years of time, more, you know, the average independent documentary film here, it takes 5 years. So being drawn to that as well. And yeah, I think that's part of it. And knowing there's a level of responsibility also that comes with the trust and with the relationship. And this is what I was talking about earlier, this idea of this power dynamic. You know, there is inherently this power dynamic that's extractive in documentary, in observational. And if you're invested in building a relationship that goes beyond that, then that's where the trust comes in. I can give you examples. I mean, when we were shooting in Haiti, I mean, the trust building there takes much, much longer. People were like, you know, you've extracted enough from us, you know, or these cameras have taken enough pictures, right? We don't need you here, or we don't need this type of storytelling here, you know. So there's an acknowledgement of what level of investment is needed to build that trust, depending on the environment you're in. And so, yeah, and then the sense of relationship that comes after, and being willing to understand that I will continue this relationship even after the documentary is done, that I've built something that's more than just the story.
Mm-hmm. And we had our first TTFF talk this morning with Orlando von Einstedel, who's an award-winning documentary filmmaker as well. And he said that you know, they have relationships with the friendships with the people who they filmed 5-10 years ago, because it's such a personal process, and you form these bonds and these relationships that just don't end when the cameras stop. Tracy, in your film, in COVID Chronicles, I noticed that you were able to get quite a few people to share and express their very, you know, their feelings and their very personal observations about just being in this time of the pandemic. What was your process for that? How did you go about that?
When you guys started talking about trust, the thought that crossed my mind was that how important trust is, especially with friends. You know, if you're filming somebody who you don't know, you need to build a certain amount of trust. If you are a friend to this person, I feel like that trust now needs to be amplified, because they are telling you something or some things that they may not necessarily want to say or want out in the open, or it's just something that is gnawing at them. And I'll give you 2 examples. My friend Renee is a businessman. And when COVID-19 started, obviously, you know, clients are contracting, their budgets are shrinking. How's he dealing with that? My friend Aaron and his wife Michèle, they had to deal with, you know, how do you deal with like elderly relatives who, you know, in the Caribbean, we're all very touchy and feely and huggy and all that kind of stuff. And you can't, no, you have to wear a mask and I can't come in near you. And when they tell you their stories, you know, as a friend, have to make sure that their time and their belief in you, for want of a better way of putting it, is rewarded. That trust is honored, so that the story that they tell you, the information that they tell you, you want to make sure that you say it right. My friend Ayana is a businesswoman and a mother and a wife, and she has like 2 little kids. So 2 little kids during a pandemic, what was that like, you know? And she talked about the relationship with her and her husband, also my friend, Kevin, and how that was strengthened and everything. And yeah, for me, I feel like, especially when you're dealing with friends, the idea of trust becomes like, okay, you're giving me all this information, you're giving me this story. It is very, very important that I make sure and tell it right. I put it out there right, so that, you know, everybody else who sees it will understand, and you wouldn't feel like you wasted your time.
Yes. So it's a matter of honoring that trust.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Whether you know your film subject, whether you knew your film subject before, or it is a very close friend. Yes. Because you know in Trinidad, they will come and tell you if you disregarded that trust. Huh?
Yeah. Very much so.
And would anyone else like to speak on that topic of trust building? I know, well, in some cases, I mean, Sam, as you said, you didn't even know that Brian was here when you flew to Trinidad, and Henrique, with you, it was just a matter of get that camera and shoot. So and Gabrielle, would any of you like to speak about how much time you had before, if you did have the time before to build trust, like with Laron? How long before you started filming did you know him?
So about, I would say maybe 2 or 3 weeks before we started filming.
Okay.
So it wasn't a very long period of time in between. So it was quite interesting, but I think, you know, as it was said before by Michèle, there is a certain, you have to, yes, almost become friends, not even almost. And as Tracy also spoke about it, you know, there's a certain level of vulnerability. There are things that people wouldn't necessarily share with anybody else, much less the public. And
yes,
in one sense, you and the camera is there, so they may not think about the repercussions immediately, even as they're saying it to you. But when they realize that, you know, this story is going abroad, you do have to engender that, you know, that sense of trust. And at the same time, and this kind of goes on the other side of it, as a filmmaker, I found in many cases, I've had to respect when, you know, or you just have to, respect when they don't want to say something, or when they want to stop, they don't want, or maybe they've already said it, but they don't want it, you know, they don't want to share that part of it in the edit. I found that on many occasions. I found that even on location, for example, and it's a matter of trust, but it's also protecting the subject. There was a documentary I was working on, and it was in a fishing village, and a female fisherwoman was sharing her story, and she has a really great business, but then the man across the fishing village is jealous of her, and then he comes out with like a knife because he sees, you know, a camera crew recording her, etc., blah, blah, blah. And then it, you know, at that point, it became less about getting the story and more about protect your subject, don't cause any disruption. If this is going to create, you know, an issue, let's just stop right there. So for me, it's yes, building that trust, but it's trust not just to tell the story right, but to protect the subject, and ensure that, yeah, you're not putting them in an uncomfortable position that has repercussions later on, or whether later on or immediately.
Exactly.
Just 2 things I want to add to the conversation about trust. One is, you know, what I've noticed sometimes, you know, even before, as you're building trust, sometimes, you know, the collaborator, the participant, the subject you're working with, sometimes they're going to want to say what they think they want, that you want to hear. you know, and so, and that becomes, and it makes sense. I mean, they want to please, they're involved because they want to please and want to make sure they do what you want. And it's being able to get beyond that so that they're sharing what they feel, not what they think you want. Right. And so it's being able to be cognizant of that. And once you do that, they become true collaborators also, because I'm in a situation, for example, Rosa Iris, there were stories that I found because she said, oh, I think this is a great story. Even her cousin who's in the film, his situation of statelessness, it is because of her that I found it. So they become then collaborators in finding out, in building more of the story. Once you kind of are kind of like almost a team in terms of figuring out what's the best way for us to tell the story, then they know even better, you know, the subject matter, because that's why you're working with them. And being able to get beyond that actually creates even a rich collaboration, but also they'll take you places, you know, that sometimes you wouldn't even dreamed of. So that's why that investment and trust is really important too, just for the story.
Very, very much so. Henrique, did you want to say something about that as well?
No, I had a shortcut because Lucas, who was my co-director, already knew Demi, and they trusted each other to tell the story. And I was just along for the ride, and I didn't have to build the trust per se. But it was very, it was interesting that there was like a building trust during the interview. That would happen to me. During the interview, I really needed for him to trust me, and I got that, and then it went smoothly. And all the talks we had after the interview were great, and we were really in sync about the film. And that was really great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it worked out. And just before we move our conversation on, Sam, I have a question for you from our audience, and which has to do with archival footage. And this is from Alberta. What have you learned in the process of accessing, obtaining, selecting, or including archival or historical footage in a documentary that you may not have known before?
What did I learn? It's a great question. There's so much out there that you wouldn't necessarily have thought about initially. You know, like for example, the fan footage that had been shot in '94. You know, I didn't know that. I didn't know that anyone had taken a camera into the stadium at that time. You know, obviously nowadays there's mobile phone footage, so people will be shooting things all the time everywhere. So I guess that's something now moving forward is kind of user generated content. That's quite a big thing now, is telling stories, you know, that way through that kind of content. So yeah, I guess I learned that there's more out there than you could possibly imagine. But also, if people will help you if you ask the question. If you're passionate about your subject, if you're honest about it, if your intentions are right, people will trust you, and they will, you know, give you these treasure troves essentially. And then it's your job as the filmmaker to kind of look after that, you know, that footage, that if it's archive stills, archive footage, whatever it is. You know, you've got to make sure that you portray, you know, you've got to do justice to that footage or those stills and that person's story. If you're going to feature the person in the story as well, you've got to make sure you do justice to that person in that sense. So yeah, I think hopefully that answers the question a little bit. But I guess in terms of independent filmmaking and in terms of the whole licensing and negotiation side of it, I've learned a hell of a lot that way, in that side of it as well. And you know, I've dealt with, you know, Getty Images, the BBC, ITV, Sky, Cricket West Indies, you know, some major kind of stakeholders, I guess. And it's about getting to the right people, and just making sure you're really, really honest and really upfront about what it is that you need. And people will support you. Like we were really well supported. You know, something like ITV. There's a lot of footage from ITV in the film, and they kind of opened up a whole load of access for us, and that was really hugely appreciated. So yeah, I'd say just go for it. Basically, if there's people out there that want to use more archive, I'd say just go for it.
I think what you're saying about being honest and sincere insofar as your intention, and when you are having these first conversations with these providers and people who are resources, makes such a difference, because then you will find people who will work with you and who may reduce fees. I mean, I think a lot of us have had that experience where someone may give you a cost, and then when you speak to them about the project, they may slash it in half or even give it to you, on a pro bono basis. So I see Henrique smiling a lot as well too, because I mean your film was mostly archival footage and such varied archival footage as well too, Henrique.
Yeah, we, as I said before, we wanted to experiment. We wanted to let's find an aesthetic. Let's build an aesthetic story that we really love. Like, let's experiment. Let's try things out. We tried a lot of stuff. There's things in there that, of course, has nothing to do with the story. A lot of stuff that we put in the film have nothing to do with the story we are telling, because we were trying to be subjective, like you wanted to ask before. We were really trying to we have this 15-minute narration of a tough story, but we wanted to make it not bigger, but more subjective. I think that's it. And we wanted people to have their own interpretation of the images and of what is being said. And we tried a lot of stuff. There is stuff there that my dad shot in VHS in the 80s. There is stuff that is from the Brazilian government in the 60s. That is stuff that is like some of the first moving images ever recorded by people. Yeah, and also this is one level of the answer. There, we really tried everything. We got some images from I think Eduardo Valentim. I forget the name of the person. We got some stuff pro bono that was really great, and I'm right now forgetting the name of the director, which is a shame because they are really, really great. And just this magnificent Super 8 footage. Or there is Bill Morrison is a director. I think he's Canadian, and he works a lot with deteriorated films from the 1920s or earlier, and he has an amazing work. And he gave us some footage pro bono, and this is one level. But in another level, about what I learned doing the research,
yes.
I just jumped, nosedived into the Brazilian military dictatorship, and I found much more than what I learned in school, of course. And it was really scary, because these guys, they did really unthinkable stuff. And more than half of it, they didn't, there is no paperwork, there's nothing. But there's a large part of it, there is documented by themselves, And you see this dictatorship, they are people, but they were monsters. And you just open a file and you find unspeakable things.
It's incredible.
And it was very enlightening to really understand, well, not only what Emil was talking about, but to really understand what happened to my country. And what we are afraid that might happen again. So doing this research really kind of changed me, you know, as a filmmaker, as a Brazilian person, as a voter, and it was very enlightening.
Very. And it's hard to face those realities at times, but we do have to become aware of them and educate ourselves. Because as you say, you know, a lot of these things they don't teach us in school. And when you get older, then you realize, oh, this is what actually happened.
Yeah.
So it's a bit unfortunate, but it's good to be enlightened. So just moving along our conversation, I wanted to also discuss with you all, how would you describe the current landscape of documentary filmmaking now for filmmakers in the Caribbean, in Latin America? And Sam, you could also give us that perspective from the UK, but you know, insofar as opportunities and stories to be discovered, how do you feel about the current landscape for doc filmmaking? Gabrielle, would you like to start us off with that one?
I was hoping somebody else is going to chip in. I think documentary filmmaking is one of the easiest ways creatively to tell somebody's story. And I say the easiest because now I think there is a wealth of public information. I think there is a hunger for the information. And so I feel now, well, I can't speak for the United States, but I feel in the Caribbean, there's a greater freedom in terms of expressing that information as well as getting that information. And I mean, I can't speak for Henrique either, because I know you probably went through some red tape to get your information and to tell your stories, this particular story. But I feel like it's easier to do it now. One, because yes, there's a hunger for the information. Two, I think this generation, and I think even the situation that we've now been put in, we definitely want to tell those stories, so we have a passion for them. And then the technology that we have now, it's cheaper, it's more affordable, it's more accessible. You know, people are making documentaries. I mean, I'm a DP as well. And yes, it's almost blasphemy to even talk about shooting with your phone. But, you know, in documentary filmmaking, it's less about the cinematography and it's more about the story. And so, you know, people technologically wise, you know, it's just easier to tell that story. It's easier to document somebody. I mean, we're even seeing it now in, you know, what's coming out in the media and, you know, what people are able to, the atrocities that people are recording on their phones, which unfortunately will become archival footage 5-10 years from now, which will be used 5-10 years from now to tell somebody else's story. But I think right now, it's just a ripe and ready time. And I think a lot more people in a shorter space of time, at least for short documentaries, are able to do so.
Mm-hmm. Yes, in a shorter space. And you're so right. And I think someone else had mentioned this as well too, just with the proliferation of smartphones. So many people are capturing events and actuality and what's happening in the world today. So there'll be a plethora of material in a few years to come. And Tracy, what about you insofar as that question?
I was thinking about it, which is why I didn't go first, because I said, you know, let the big people go ahead and talk.
That's someone else. Gabrielle, let
the big people go ahead and talk. I will stay quiet. The thing that crosses my mind is I'm seeing governments in the Caribbean. People are talking about doing more local content, having more local content on the airwaves, which means that it's a little bit more open, or people are more, I guess, a little bit more willing to have what you have. If that makes any sense at all. The general gist of what I'm saying is, because, you know, governments, especially well in Trinidad and Tobago, we always talk about, we need to see more local content. We want to have more local content. We need to have more local content. This is a thing that I hear like every 3 weeks, somebody says we need to have more local content. It kind of opens up the platform a little bit more, that you could be saying, oh, well, I'm going to go and make a documentary on X. And there's a willingness, I would think, there's a willingness now to have more of that local content to be able to put on the airwaves, or just at least to be told. So that's the thought that crossed my mind when I heard the question. Yeah.
Right. Okay. In terms of local content. Well, I don't want to call anyone else out. Unless
I want to say something about, and just in terms of our own self-reflection. I think there are two things. One, well, there's many things, but it's one thing that there's more possibility to have access to potentially tell stories, but can you make a living out of it? Documentary filmmaking is an art of the elite. I don't think that there's a doubt about that. I am in a privileged position right now to be able to choose this, but it's not what's paying the rent for me as an independent filmmaker. I have other work that gives me the opportunity to be able to do that. And if we look at, the story is always told by those who have the power, in terms of, even as we look at history, and even as we think about what kinds of histories are told, and we are actually revisiting very much the perspectives that have been in the foreground. So we're at a very kind of dangerous crossroads, I feel, certainly in the United States, of the consolidation of power around documentary, and who will tell what stories and whose stories. And the question is, how will communities continue to be able to resist against that in a place where the Netflixes, the Amazons, and all of that documentary, we can talk about a renaissance, but who is having access to that and is able to make a living out of it is a different story. I can't speak to Latin America or the Caribbean, but for the United States, we are, yes, sure, people can tell their films, their stories through the iPhone, but who will use that archival footage later, right? And if we're looking at the history around the pandemics, in the case of the United States, when there was the flu of 1918, this is when Hollywood, the power of Hollywood took over. Before that, it was very much communities telling their own stories, documenting, telling their own fiction to their own audiences. There was, a thriving Black cinema, thriving Latinx cinema, a thriving kind of Asian American cinema in different spaces. Pandemic happened. People had no more money. Those theaters fell. The people who had consolidated money, Hollywood moguls came, bought up all of those theaters, and then Hollywood was born. So, we understand what that is in terms of propaganda and how we see ourselves in representation.
Of course.
It's a bit of a crossroads. We have to be wary also of understanding it's still a moment where we have to resist, and we have to kind of push against some of the power that exists, and the potential for consolidation now in terms of our own economic crises as a result of the pandemic.
Exactly, and especially so, I think, as independent filmmakers, because then it can be even more of a struggle. We only have another 7 minutes. I can't believe it. So let me take another question from our audience. Alberta actually would like to know, is audience importance viewed slightly differently in a fiction film versus a non-fiction film? She is saying it seems like the documentary filmmaker is the first audience, which we spoke about, Michèle, which you spoke about. So Sam, why don't I put that question to you to start with? Do you believe that in documentary filmmaking, the audience is viewed differently in terms of their importance than in non-fiction filmmaking? I hope I'm getting that question right for Alberta.
As in the audience in narrative film.
Yeah,
that?
I'll just reread her question once more. I wonder if the audience importance is viewed slightly differently in a fiction film versus a non-fiction film. It seems like the documentary filmmaker is the first audience. So she may be talking about the relevance of the audience as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's a tough one. I would have thought audience would be very important in a fiction film, in a narrative film. But I think it's important in both. I personally think it's important in both. To be honest, it's all storytelling, isn't it? At the end of the day. So, and if you don't have an audience, no one's going to come and see the film. So, you know, you could make it for yourself, but I'm a firm believer in, would I want to go and see this film? You know, whether it was a narrative short or a documentary or, you know, or an experimental art film, you know, mockumentary, whatever it is. I'd want to make something that people would want to go and see. Otherwise, for me, it wouldn't. I'd be a bit pointless in a way. That's just my personal opinion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think we have time for one more question, which I'll pose to all of our panelists. This is from Rachel Ann. How is cultural authenticity maintained in documentary films during precarious times?
Can you repeat that?
Yes. How is cultural authenticity maintained in documentary films during precarious times? Henrique or Tracy, would you like to? As much as I know Gabrielle wants me to call her out.
Still thinking about it. That's a tough.
Cultural. How do we maintain cultural authenticity in documentary films during times such as these? I think that's probably what Rachel Ann is talking about. And we actually only have another 3 to 4 minutes to answer that question.
To be honest with you, I mean, like my mind swirls, but you know, I go back to something I was saying a little earlier in terms of like how in the Caribbean and how in Trinidad, how we would have operated, like especially during this COVID time. We can't hug, we can't talk, we can't be in a close proximity with persons. You want to still get the idea and the message out about what is happening during this pandemic and that sort of thing. So I don't know necessarily about culturally, but I still want to have a real measure of authenticity with it. Like all my people are Trinidadian, even Trinidad and Tobagonian. Even my friend Ian, who's living in Canada, he's still, you know, a Trinidadian living over there. So it was like his experience from Canada versus like my friend who lives in the West, and that's West Trinidad, that's one scene, and somebody else who might be living in Southern Trinidad, that's another scene, that's another cultural gap, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I feel like I'm not too sure culturally, I just know that it's meant to be as authentic as possible, just to get their real truth. Mm-hmm. Through me to put out there. That's it. That's where my ramble ends.
Thank you for that ramble. Henrique, what about you? How do you feel about, you know, creating films in times such as these? How do you maintain that cultural authenticity? Is it more difficult now, given the times that we're in, or has it not changed for you as a filmmaker?
I think I will not answer this for me. I will answer this for Lucas, my co-director. He, at the beginning of the pandemic, he also made a short film on his own with archival footage from various personalities, Black personalities in Brazil, in Africa, in the United States, and as a counterpoint to a node interview to someone in a beach in Rio de Janeiro, a white person in a privileged neighborhood, talking about how they didn't want poor people in their beach. And Lucas, he made a magnificent film about that. And I think that this pandemic, he was really drawn to look inwards, seeing what he had in himself and what was happening outside. And not the pandemic per se, but what was the pandemic exacerbating about what people already thought. And he was very authentic in that. And I think it may be his most authentic film, the most of himself that I've ever saw in a film of his. So it's a shame that he isn't here to talk about it, but that's the only example I have. And I think the pandemic made us look inwards, and the audience is also looking for these stories that are more original and more specific, but also universal. And I don't know, maybe I lost my train of thought here. I'm sorry.
No, I understand what you're saying, and I think a lot of us feel like that. Is that in a time like this, we are looking inwards, and we need to connect with each other even more. And I think we're just seeing it as not only how much we need people, but that we need to be authentic to ourselves. To thine own self be true, is the saying, not so? Yes. Well, I think that's a great point to wrap up on, and I'm so sorry we have to end it here, but I can't believe an hour and a half has already passed. So Tracy, Sam, Gabrielle, Henrique, and Michèle, thank you so much for your time today, for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot. It was a lot of fun.
Beautiful.
It was
Thank you, guys.
to have you. Thank you so much. And thank you to our audience for watching. And we'll see you over the next few days of the festival. Remember to check out online.ttfilmfestival.com to watch the fantastic films we have for you this year. So thanks and have a great day. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.